So, okay, what type of things can trigger trauma?
Mm.
So, Kiana, I'll start with you.
Some things that can trigger trauma. Well, there's a lot of things, of course, that can trigger trauma. Some of the things are, it could be child abuse, that can kind of like trigger trauma for someone maybe coming close to your personal space. That could kind of trigger something and make it like a flashback. Um, what else? You have sexual assault. Is right there at the top of my head. Oh gosh. Oh my gosh. DV, domestic violence. It was
Okay.
like right there. Like it's right there. Come out. Domestic violence. Let me see what else. You have for some like alcohol, substance abuse can actually be like a trauma for some. And then you also have, let's see, um traumatic experiences, any kind of traumatic experiences that shift the way you function in your life can technically be a trauma. Yeah. So those are some of the things.
Okay. That can be physical abuse. That can also be verbal abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. You know, especially when you're dealing with young children in their tender age, it's very important that we are mindful of what we say to them and how we approach them, because you'll be surprised how one little thing can stick in their minds here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And like I always say, a seed that's planted. And then once that seed is planted, it grows. And then as part of their defense mechanism, as they build the walls and they form layers of protection against that hurt by what someone has said to them. Okay. And so that's my thing talking about sabotaging behaviors. That's how those things start. That's how we begin to engage in those behaviors. But getting back to Trump, we think about violence, rape, different things. Okay. But there's also self inflicted trauma.
Yep.
Okay. You have those people who cut themselves and do things to themselves because out of guilt or whatever's going on with them, you know, emotional instability. And so they cut themselves as a form of self punishment. And that's self inflicted trauma. Okay. Now, I thought about it for myself 47 years,
Mm.
obesity. That was self inflicted trauma because that's 47 years that I subjected myself to trauma by the excess weight and the different things that it was doing to my body. Self inflicted trauma. So there's all different types of trauma. And there's certain things that trigger that trauma. And so that's what I want to talk about tonight, triggers. You know, I think about the movie with Denzel Washington, and I can't think of the actor's name when he was the devil had possessed him. It was the seven. And every time he would touch somebody's hand, he started singing that song, "Time is on my side."
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think about that all the time because that is a trigger. That song was a trigger.
Mm.
Okay. And so sometimes it could be smells, it could be holidays. We just got out of the holiday season. So for some people, maybe they've experienced a loss during that time. And so the holiday season can trigger traumatic episodes for them. Okay. It could be a food, it could be a color. Okay. So there's several things that we can identify as triggers. that are related to trauma. So if we're going to educate the public, what kind of things should we tell them as far as to help them identify they're going through a traumatic experience, how to identify those triggers, and then most of all, how to cope with them. Marie?
Good evening, everyone. As you were talking about trauma, I was thinking about some traumatic experiences that I have had to overcome. And most recently, I had to overcome being in a car accident. So people
Mhm.
sometimes don't realize that having a major car accident is very traumatic. And then you have those triggers. So every time I drive on the freeway or on the streets, I start getting very anxious. I start gripping the steering wheel, and I notice myself getting loud, like, you guys are driving too close to me, even though they can't hear me. I'm still saying those things and making gestures and things. And so one of the things is just recognizing when you're experiencing some anxiety, if you're feeling like very emotional or you feel like you can't function anymore. Because I can say when I'm on the freeway, I'm getting very anxious. I'm getting very scared and afraid and fearful that someone is going to hit me, because I was hit from behind, and totaled out my car. So every time someone is driving very close to me, I start panicking. So when you start panicking, that is one of the signs that alerts you that you're having some kind of traumatic experience. The same thing could be like when my mother passed away. That was a traumatic experience for me because I had to literally watch her transition through death. It's very different when someone like dies suddenly. That's a different type of trauma. But when you have to watch someone transition through the death, that's another type of trauma. And I lost a lot of weight. I couldn't sleep at night. I was worried all the time. And my mind just constantly replayed over and over and over and over again that my mom was very sick and she was going to die. And so those are some things that you can, if you see that you're not eating, you're not sleeping, or you're eating too much, or you have insomnia. Some people call it insomnia instead of not sleeping at night. Or if you see that you're very anxious, you're very worried, those are signs that you're having traumatic experience. Or you see that your senses are elevated, right? Like maybe you're getting very angry, you're crying a lot, just different types of things. Those are signs that you're having traumatic experiences. And that's when you really need to seek support. Seek some type of support, whether it be counseling. Maybe you need to talk to, if you don't believe in counseling, maybe you need to go talk to your pastor or a trusted friend that can help you with what you're experiencing and get you to see that counseling is a great option. Counseling helped me tremendously. So I'm all for counseling and I promote counseling. So those are some ways that you can identify some traumatic experiences.
And I'm glad you mentioned counseling. A lot of people are embarrassed by that. That is nothing to be ashamed of. We all need someone to talk to at different times. And sometimes it may need a neutral party, someone who can look at things from the outside in and listen as you're talking. And they can be objective and tell you and give you the tools you need to overcome trauma. You also mentioned death, and we talked about this the last episode about the different types of death and how the dynamic changes. So you talked about watching your mom transition. With both of my parents, I was just very calm. I didn't cry. I was just fine. I just carried on. The difference between my mother and my father, I was able to see. my mother's grave. I was able to see them for the coffin. I was able to see them close the grave. Okay? Now, different dynamics with my father, different national secretary. They don't allow you to come around. When the service is over, you have to exit. So I did not know exactly where he was buried. My father was buried. I did not see him close his grave. So 4 years, I was in like this little space where I was not really sure. I mean, I knew he wasn't here, okay? But in the back of my mind, sometimes I'm like, oh, I got to go see about daddy. Well, no, no, you don't. Or I would see things that I knew he liked, and I'm like, well, I need to get this for daddy. And I talked to myself and said, no, you don't need to do that. But the traumatic experience from me, I went back this past March to actually go visit his grave. Now, mind you, I go to my mother's grave and it doesn't bother me. And I can go, visit, I'm good. But my first time observing that man's face on that tombstone, that was my traumatic experience. I lost it. I lost it. So trauma comes in different forms and it affects us different ways. And that's why, I'm so glad we're doing this episode of this series because trauma is real. And a lot of people are not aware that they are undergoing trauma. And sometimes we develop some behaviors as a result of trauma. So, Kiana, what do you think about it?
First of me, dealing with trauma, like you said, it does. It takes a toll on you. It takes a toll on your mental. It takes a toll on your spiritual. It takes a toll on the physical body when you have trauma because it affects it so much. And when you don't get to the bottom of the line, or the root, I shall say, of what is causing the trauma, like you say, you will have behaviors. So, by just taking that time far as for yourself, sitting down, you know, at the times you feel triggered, actually ask yourself, what is it that just triggered me? Instead of just going on, because sometimes we like to just, oh, you know what, something just bothered me. Okay, I'm gonna just go ahead and keep going on. No, sit down. Find out exactly what it was that just triggered you to feel that particular emotion and really think about it. Don't shy away from it. Don't be embarrassed. Don't feel like, oh my God, I'm going to cry or anything like that, or I'm going to feel angry. These are emotions that you have to go through in order to get the healing that you need from the trauma. So just identifying can definitely help someone understand, like, you know what? This is going on. This is the behavior. This is what my body is telling me. Because your body is not going to lie to you. We have to understand the body is not going to lie when we're going through something that is affecting us on an emotional standpoint, or shall I say a mental standpoint. It's not going to lie. So find out why your body is feeling so anxious when you're doing certain things. And it could be anything, like like Marie, she said hers was, getting back into the car. She started feeling those experiences. She started feeling those physiological features of everything going through the body. That was hers. You know, when it comes down to it, we just got to be able to just identify. When you identify what it is and actually sit with it and, seek out the, support, and don't be afraid to be like, you know what, this is what I'm going through. Because that's another thing. Some people are just so scared and they're afraid of what others may think about them. But this is something that is normal. This is something that everyone goes through. And no one can really help you until, guess what? You seek out that help. You seek out that help of, like, I want to get the help that I need to, help me with what I'm going through when it comes down to trauma.
And I'm glad you said that the emotions or the feelings or whatever that we experience as a result of trauma, that it's necessary that we experience those things in order to recognize the trauma to deal with. So I'm glad you brought that point out. That's very important because a lot of times subconsciously we do things and we're not aware of what we're doing or why we're doing it. And so I think it's very important. And in our community, as far as mental illness, it's still taboo to go out and get some help.
Mhm.
You know, and the church does not promote it. Now I'm not knocking the church, okay, but it does. But again, it's nothing wrong with being mentally ill. It's just like being a diabetic or hypertensive. It's an illness.
Mhm.
It's an illness. But the beauty of it is it can be treated, it can be managed. If you embrace that you have the mental illness. Just like if we embrace that we're undergoing trauma, if we embrace that, face it head on, okay, and recognize it, okay, and then start watching the triggers. That is so important. Again, we're promoting. You need reach out. There's free services out there. Most health insurance plans pay for it. Some jobs offer employee assistance that will give you so many free sessions.
Mhm.
So seek help. If you think you need help, call your local mental health association, and they will guide you in the direction that you need to go. Okay, so important, so important. So Marie, what things are you doing now? You've recognized that you experience the anxiety now when you get behind the wheel. So what type of things are you doing to help yourself to overcome this?
So one of the things that I started doing, I had my car accident, a little over 2 years ago. So when it first happened, it was really bad. I didn't want to drive at all. So one of the things that I do, even now when I'm in the car and I start feeling anxious, I'll start to take deep breaths and just give myself some self-talk to calm myself down, so that I'm not feeling so anxious and so panicked. Those are some things that I generally do when I'm in the car, just to take deep breaths. Sometimes, if I'm feeling too overwhelmed, I will pull over off the road into a parking lot and just take a few minutes to gather myself again before I hop back on the highway, so that I'm not the reason why accident is happening. Because sometimes when you're experiencing that traumatic experience, you may do something to cause someone else some harm. I like when Kiana was talking about um, emotions, and she was really discussing emotional intelligence and being self aware of who you are and what you're experiencing. I think that is so important, and that's what I realized, that I'm panicking, right? That I'm having this anxiety, so I had to be self-aware of that. And then what am I going to do to solve this issue way? And so that's what I started doing, just taking those deep breaths and things. And it's so important to just deal with your trauma. Constance, you talked about 47 years you dealt with obesity, that trauma of obesity. Well, that didn't just affect your weight, that affected your whole life, right?
Mhm.
It's affecting every area of your life because of this trauma that you experienced being obese. Same thing. I heard Kiana talk about child abuse and other types of trauma. There's so many different types of trauma, right?
Yes.
If we had an hour, we still can't talk about all the different types of trauma. The only thing we can do is really sum it up. That's there's emotional and physical trauma, right? And so when I was a child, I experienced uh not child abuse, but I had molestation. So that's the type of trauma, right? And so I carried that many, many years, which affected relationships. And until I was able to deal with that trauma that I experienced way back in my childhood, my relationships were not going to be solid relationships. They weren't going to be productive relationships. I always had self sabotage. I heard you, Constance, talk about self sabotage. And so I would self sabotage relationships, or I would expect something to take place because of these things that I experienced in my childhood. So I always had these negative thoughts. And until I went to counseling and I was able to um, compartmentalize all of the things that were happening in my life and the things that I were experiencing, and then come to some rationalization that this wasn't my fault, that this wasn't caused because of me. And then once I realized that, then I can start putting things into perspective of how I needed to handle different situations and the different types of trauma that I've been through in my life.
Wow. Wow. And that's true. The slightest little thing, we're all hardwired different, and things affect each of us differently. But sometimes the most minute thing can happen to us, and it will just mess us up. It'll mess us up. Somebody can say something, somebody criticize something you did, and it sticks with you. Okay? And if you're never able to let that thing go,
Mm-hmm.
it's traumatic. It's traumatic. And I know for me, I had to learn to let some things go. And it was an awareness for me one day. I'm like, you know what? I was pondering over something that someone had said to me. And I thought about it. I'm like, well, okay, so I put the ownership back on them. So let's talk about you.
Mhm.
And did I mess them up? Okay. Because then they had to think and look at their own act. Okay. And so, Marie, you always talk about that emotional intelligence and being aware, self aware. That's so important. That's so important.
Mm-hmm.
And so, some of the things that people need to learn, of course, seek help, but they're going to have to learn to forgive in some cases. And when you forgive someone, it's for you, it's not for them. Okay? You forgive that person, you forget some things, and you move forward. Keep it, those are my two favorite words, or three. Keep it moving. Because if you don't, we all know what happens with stagnant water. If that water keeps low and it remains stagnant, it
Hmm.
is no good.
Yep.
So keep it moving. Kiana, any additional thoughts?
The main thing is just really get help.
Mhm.
Get help. Seek support. You know, I know, like when you go to sleep at night, things like that, these are issues that you do have to deal with on your own. But don't ever, forget that you're not alone. You're not alone. There's going to be somebody who's willing to go and stand by you and be that support despite the ups and the downs.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if it's from a friend, it doesn't matter if it's from a counselor, it doesn't matter if it's from a priest. Get the help that you need, because this technically it's your life. It's your life.
And my thing is, yes, get help, but don't be embarrassed.
Exactly.
Don't be embarrassed. Things happen,
Hmm.
life happens. We all endure and undergo certain things, okay? But there comes a point, okay, life happens. There's a huge rock in my way or on my path. I have a choice. Am I going to climb over it or am I going to walk around it? Same thing with trauma. That rock is in your hard place. Are you going to climb over it or are you going to walk around it? Marie, any final thoughts?
I think once you identify your triggers, it's important to stay consistent with um, moving past it. Just like you said, keep it moving. So when you have identified your triggers, I think it's most important that you now set a plan of action and then you stay consistent with that plan. And even though you may fall down, you can get back up and get back on your horse and keep on riding. Just because something didn't work immediately, to get over trauma is not easy. It's not easy at all. I would be lying to you if I told you that it's easy and it can happen overnight. It does not happen overnight, especially when you're dealing with years and years of trauma that has been compounded. And then you couple that with new traumas and traumatic experiences that you have. And so you have to really be willing and wanting to be better. And if you're not willing and wanting to be better, nothing is going to work until you've had a made up mind that this is something that you want to do. No amount of counseling or help is going to help you unless you really want to help yourself. And so the very first thing that you have to do is be honest with yourself about where you are and what you're experiencing. Because if you're not honest with yourself, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be honest with the counselor or the therapist that's trying to help you. You're still going to mask your pain and your trauma, and then you're not going to get the results that you're hoping to get. So, if I can tell you anything, is to be honest with yourself, and that you have to really, really want to be better. You have to have a changed mindset in order to become better and in order to move away from the trauma and become triumphant.
Hmm.
Exactly. That
Love
is
it.
so true. That is so true. But
Hmm.
it's sad to say, again, there's so many people that live in that dark space of shame and they're afraid to step out to try to overcome this. They have not yet fully embraced what has happened to them or what they have undergone. And so it's really a scary place for some people, and I understand that. It's a scary place because anytime you're considered as different, okay, or odd, that's a scary place. Okay. But again, it's no reason to be ashamed.
Hmm.
Reach out and get the help that you need. So, ladies, I want to thank you so much for joining me this evening for our second episode of Unveiling Trauma. And to our listening audience, may God continue to
Hmm.
bless you richly
Yeah.
today, tomorrow, and forever. And have a good night.